not an opportunity just for the two gentlemen to speak for lengthy periods. So yeah, look forward to concluding with a bit of a conclusion towards the end of any of the questions that are on the sheet to wind up the session. And we have around about 50 minutes. So without further ado, salam alaikum, kia ora no tātou. I'll hand over to you now, Alex, to kick us off.
Thanks, Andrew. So as Andrew sort of introduced, so I'm actually from London originally, but I've been 20 years outside of the UK, living most of my time in Australia, more recently Singapore, and then I moved to New Zealand just over 1 year ago. So I was going through quarantine hotel last month. In terms of Middle Eastern experience, I thought I'll talk to my two recent businesses. Before EP, I was working at a company called Tiger Spike. I was there for 11 years, of which the final 6 I was CEO. And I sold that company to a US public listed business in 2017. We were a tech services company. We had about 500 people and we had 12 offices. One of those was Dubai. We actually won a contract with Emirates, a multi-year contract, and we won that offshore. And off the back of that contract, we then built out a team. We ended up with a team of about 60, 70 when I left in that region. So quite a bit of learning through that process. Then in May 2019, I joined Education Perfect, a Kiwi tech company that's trying to take over the world. Currently, we play in the edtech space. Year 5 to year 12 is our sort of space in schools. So if you think sort of 10-year-olds up, we have a toolkit for teachers that they can use. We're in about 95% of high schools in New Zealand. Our product, we're in over 2,000 schools in Australia, and we're now on a real sort of global journey. So we're in over 50 countries now around the world. And we recently took some investment from KKR. So we actually sort of sold the company in September, and now we have our new journey. So we have our next sort of 4 or 5 year journey ahead of us. And that came from their global impact funds. So sort of very interested in us around equitable education and making an impact in education. Where we are in the UAE, so we actually have 4 people on the ground in Dubai at the moment. I have my chief sales and marketing officer, who I actually stole from Emirates. He was the ex-head of digital Emirates. He came and joined EP in February this year. Working with about a dozen schools locally currently. Have a few partnerships with British schools, Middle East, and some of the sort of teacher groups as well. But still very much early in our infancy, really. So we've been there on the ground for the last 12 months or so. That's my intro, Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Hand over to you now, Brad.
Sure.
Floor is yours.
You can hear me? Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. Great to be here and great to be connected to my home country over the internet. My history is in the Middle East. I've been here in Dubai for a little over 10 years. I actually came from, I was working in London at the time. I came over when the recession really took a big impact on the UAE in particular. I came over as part of the restructuring team to help the Dubai government restructure its balance sheet. In other words, its debt position versus asset position. I came over and I looked at a company, one of their corporate companies that had $26 billion of debt and asset cover of about 3. So many times insolvent at that point in time. So it was a very, should we say the country itself and the region was in a very tough period, both from a recession perspective, and not long after that we had the Arab uprising and the Arab Spring, which also increased the strain of the region. So it's a very interesting time to come across a region that was quickly developing and was quite vulnerable at that point. So it's quite a lucky time to come across and make some really solid relationships in the region in a time of need. to put it lightly. Since then, I've been heavily in the tech space. So I'm actually a corporate finance M&A guy at heart. That's my background. But I started helping technology businesses in the region here go through their kind of growth, their fundraising, their growth and exit strategies. So I joined Noon. I was one of the founding members of Noon.com, which is the Middle East equivalent of Amazon, trying to build the Amazon marketplace. I set up the first digital bank here for one of the local banks, and now I have founded a company called Cashee. Cashee is essentially a neobank, a digital bank for teenagers in the region. So I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but teenagers actually up to about the age of about 20, they can't open a bank account here. So unlike all of us in New Zealand who had bank books and would walk down to the local post bank and deposit their 50 cents and be taught that kind of financial literacy from a very young age, there's a big gap in the market here. So teens, kids, emerging adults, whatever you want to call them, are completely excluded from the financial system, and we're creating the first regional digital bank for that. We are launching in the UAE in December. So that's happening in December, and Saudi, I think, will be closer to Q3 next year. We look at our company as a fintech. Yes, we're providing a financial digital bank for teenagers, but we're also a ed tech in the sense that, you know, the foundations of this product and this business is to try and improve financial literacy, to make sure our teenagers have much better money management skills than perhaps we had, and hopefully make a real positive social impact in the region. I think people know that in many of the countries, for example, women are pretty disenfranchised. They're excluded from making their own financial management decisions in some countries, and it's sort of left to the father of the household. And these trends are changing very quickly. So there's we feel like there's a real positive social impact that this kind of tool can have, and really plug a gap in the market as well. So thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Brad. You're most welcome. So I'll kick off with a couple of questions to start with, and no set order. So Alex or Brad, if you want to jump in and answer the first one, or answer both, and we can play around. And then Andrew and Ed, if you've got anything to contribute, feel free. But first of all, what's the general feel of the tech sector in the region? Obviously, you know, you're based in the UAE, you're doing some work in Saudi, Brad, so you'll have a bit of a sense, but even further afield in terms of you know, other GCC countries, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman. I'm not sure if you've got anything in terms of Egypt, where we have a bit of a crossover between our council and the North African Council, so it may be of interest to our members. So first question, what's the general feel of the tech sector? Second question, how are technology businesses in the Middle East going in the COVID environment?
Yeah, right. I think, Brad, you've probably, should we just tag team? I could start maybe on the sort of the perception of tech in the region, and I sort of experienced this actually in the early days working with Emirates, was that generally businesses in the region, they're very open to foreign technology companies. And in some respects, I remember when we first won the contract with the Emirates, we were competing against a number of local suppliers, and it was almost to an advantage that we were a foreign developer. Just the perception of foreign, maybe it's glossier, or they think it's going to be a better product. And so for us, that was always gave us a bit of an advantage in the region, to generally get our technology working and them to buy into the fact that we were a foreign company. Also have found that the region, and particularly the UAE, want to be progressive, you know, want to make Dubai the center of the universe. That's why the Emirates is there. It's a single destination to anywhere in the world. and they've wanted to try and push tech and push innovation. And so with that, there's always been quite a healthy appetite for innovation. That doesn't necessarily mean that all things are technically advanced, because sort of to Brad's point, there are quite a few administration bits, living bits that are quite backward if you're looking at it from a New Zealand perspective. But they're willing to try tech, and so for that reason, it's always been a really interesting market for both the companies I've worked for.
Yeah, I mean, just to dovetail off that, I mean, if you step back and look at the demographics of the region, you know, we are a very young population. A lot of these countries have a smartphone penetration of close to 100%, you know, more than the UK, more than the US, and probably much more than New Zealand from a smartphone penetration perspective. So when you think about the population, a lot of these countries, really young, they're digital natives, they're really fast adapters. So there's definitely a community need to adopt technology. And I think this has been recognized and really encouraged by the government. I'd say in the last 5 years, I felt to me that the government is saying, okay, we know that oil's going to run out one day. We know that you know, oil may not be so relevant in the future, and technology is the future. And so there's a lot of government push, acknowledging that they've got a very young population. They're really fast adapters, and they want to push technology. I think, Andrew, to your point, when you look at the region, you do have to look at the countries quite separately. To me, I would say, you know, you've got the Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman. These, to me, have a lot of similarities in their adapting of technology. And I think it largely comes down to their infrastructure. So they've got the infrastructure to support the technology. When you head towards North Africa, it's a bit of a different story. And you've got a wider mix of your population, likes of Egypt, and we're actually launching in Egypt next year as well. And our market strategy for Cashee in Egypt is very different to what we would have in Saudi and the UAE. You know, you've got income levels that vary, living standards that vary. They're still, you know, emerging. They're very much sort of emerging country in the North Africa region. So you have to come at it from a different perspective. In the UAE in particular, I think we've had a couple of really big success stories in the tech space, which is creating a really positive sentiment. My previous company, which is called Noon.com, you know, raised $1 billion. So got a lot of press on that. It's #1 in Saudi over Amazon. The brand is everywhere in the region at the moment, thanks to its backing from PIF, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. So that kind of was a big success story in the e-commerce space. Amazon came in and bought Souk.com, which was another e-commerce business, which I advised on that transaction. We had the equivalent of Uber in the region called Careem, was bought by Uber. So we're starting to see these kind of really large transactions and successful unicorns starting to come up and make a real name for itself. And I think that's exciting the region a little bit. I mean, I come from the M&A background, and starting my business, obviously you need to raise money. And you talk to, I've talked to a lot of VCs in the US and Europe and Asia and things like that. And the sentiment towards the Middle East is changing on a tech front. They know it's a big market. 5 years ago, perhaps they were not so comfortable with the governance of the region. They just didn't know it, so weren't so comfortable with it, but that's also changing. So I suspect you'll start seeing a lot of even the US VCs coming in and supporting local tech businesses. And I think this is really the kind of the cauldron. It's right at the start of a tech boom, I feel like, in the region.
Yeah, well, what you're seeing actually in market is we saw, so for example, in Abu Dhabi now, they have a new, it might have been for a while, but we seem to be pushing it more with some R&D to put engineering resources into the region as something that we're going to be seriously looking at You know, as a Kiwi company, as I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of, the tech resource scene is very difficult at the moment in Australia and New Zealand, from just, you know, the skills, and also the salaries are jumping up 30-40%, and businesses are having to look at a lot of different options when it comes to engineering and support. And you wouldn't necessarily have seen a startup scene maybe 5-10 years ago in this region, but they are now encouraging companies to come in and spend engineering dollars. And so if you have Kiwi tech, but you're looking at offshore options, this region is starting to become quite a serious consideration. And I think that's been accelerated off the back of COVID, which is probably your second question, Adrian, in terms of, sorry, Andrew, in terms of the impact, in that the regions wanted to operate quickly. You know, it's wanted to get people in and out, and, you know, it's got Expo 2020, so UAE, Dubai, they wanted to make Dubai operate a lot faster than most regions actually in the world, and that's why people can fly out, and Andrew's able to fly to places that we dream of at the moment. But that also creates, you know, creates an environment where people can work and do business, and that's where there's quite a lot of opportunity, I think, for technology companies.
How open?
No, sorry, Tim. Just before I'll come to you with your question. So both of you are dealing in that sort of that very interesting age group, and obviously handheld devices are a big push for you, Brad. So the question is probably more a subsidiary on COVID and the environment generally, particularly around schools, which has been a long-standing passionate business of mine across that region. A lot of schools have sort of said, you know, you can't have these devices in operation during class time, etc. That's all been flipped on its head, obviously, with face-to-face learning being drastically reduced and online being the main mechanism. What do you think, Alex, in terms of things starting to come back to normal over there more so than here? Will we be seeing a hybrid? Will we be seeing it return to what it was pre-COVID, or, you know, what's your feeling? Because you guys are obviously really starting to expand in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the global market, you know, I mean, it's pretty old school, right? Education, and they've been fairly sort of resistant to any type of technology. I think that's out on a global level, actually, global scale, for what we've seen. COVID's definitely helped to break that resistance to change, because schools had to just embrace technology in different ways and start to think about using technology on a day-to-day basis. Our feeling is that the blended learning environment, you know, will be where it will end up. So there's definitely going to be somewhere between using data and technology in support of people in classroom and face-to-face interaction, and all of the components is very important of learning. So I think it's sort of somewhere in the middle. And I think, you know, the Middle East is definitely a region that's actually probably more conservative than most, due to sort of cultural aspects of the region when it comes to school. So we've actually had to be quite cautious around even the lessons that we're providing. You know, we have a number of core subjects, things that might meet the New Zealand curriculum doesn't necessarily meet the curriculum of the UAE, for example. And so you do need to make some contextual changes to sort of make that work. But from a tech perspective, we're seeing really good engagement, and schools being very open to bringing technology into the classroom.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Andrew, not relevant to me in particular, but I think from a tech, in the general tech perspective, I feel like there's two sectors that have really old school sectors that have been pushed forward. One is education, exactly for what was just discussed before, and the other one is health. You know, health has always been super old school as well. You go to the doctor, you wait in the waiting room, you do this, you fill out the paper form. You know, these kind of things, these two sectors in particular, I feel like people were resistant to change for some reason, and COVID has flipped it and pushed it through. And, you know, even from a regulatory perspective, you're looking at healthcare and telemedicine and things like that. Technology is really helping these two sectors in particular move from old school to new school very quickly. And I think that's probably two of the best examples of a positive COVID impact. Yeah,
having formerly been in a significant education remit across public and private sector, and now in the health business, I couldn't agree with you both more from that perspective. Sorry to cut you off, Tim. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm just so I don't have any experience in the UAE or Dubai or anything like that. I'm from Turkey, and I have quite a lot of ties in Turkey and spend quite a lot of time there. But I'm interested in how open the market is. So if you go in there as kind of a unknown entity or whatever, you start up a company. Because I know that in a lot of countries, and I think New Zealand probably qualifies as one of those countries, there's a lot of gatekeeping happening. It's really hard to get large contracts because you're not politically connected, and you don't have big names attached to you or whatever the case may be. It's hard to get funding unless you do have those things. But like in the United States, it's a lot easier to enter the market. It's a lot easier to grow your business over there. It's a lot easier to get funding if you're not known, because your ideas and product are a little bit more important than who do you know and who you're connected to. So I'm just curious as to what the market's like over there, how open they are to foreign companies coming in, because I think in some, like in Turkey, for example, sometimes there's a lot of perception of corruption. So somebody might look at a New Zealand company and say, hey, look, they're not likely to be corrupt, they're likely to be more, but on the other hand, like I said, it may be harder for you to enter the market because it's always dominated by one or two entities, any market that you enter.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I think for being a foreign tech is definitely not a barrier. And so I think there's definitely an appetite to talk to foreign companies because maybe they're not necessarily perceived as being corrupt, or they're perceived as having better technology or better infrastructure or whatever it might be. So I think there's definitely that's the feeling that I've always had. I think though, to work in the region, and this is what we did immediately, was you do have to have someone on the ground. I think it's very difficult to work in the region without someone on the ground, because you do have to have that local context, and the region is all about relationships, and there are nuances that you need to understand, and you can then get traction, but there's definitely a feeling that you need to eyeball someone, and you need to sort of be visible to kind of create that connection for someone to do business with you. So I think that's that important blend. But as a foreign business with someone on the ground, you can get traction. You can grow a business.
I do think that's one thing that New Zealand, in general, would be very wise to do, is to push this idea of a less corrupt.
Yeah, well, the New Zealand brand is, I think it's an absolute competitive advantage. I mean, we've incorporated, like one of my sayings is onwards and upwards, and I've got a Māori version which is e ke panaku, e ke tangaro, and we've got elements of the sort of the cultural heritage of the business, the nature, Jacinda at the moment. From a foreign perspective, there's a lot of good feels from that, and I think at the moment, the market's borderless. There's a lot of opportunities for New Zealand to compete with any of the businesses around the world. So
Jacinda is wildly popular in Turkey. I don't know how popular she is otherwise in the Middle East. She is.
I'll just move on.
They put her face on the Burj Khalifa for a week. She's extremely popular. Yeah.
Totally. What I'd also like to suggest, and we'll move on to some further questions, but what I'd like to suggest is we also have representatives from NZT, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who are part of the council. The council's remit is to support businesses such as what you're describing, to create those networks on the ground. But we also have close contacts with NZTE and Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make some introductions. I will also say, particularly in the tech space, a little bit less in the fintech space, but also in my experience in the edutech space, there are incubators in Dubai that are specifically set up to support, with our connections through NZT, New Zealand business. Funnily enough, at the bottom of the Emirates Twin Towers off Sheikh Zayed Road, where all these little startups can actually incubate together. And there is opportunities for funding. There's opportunities for funding there, and there's also opportunities for funding here. So I would suggest, Tim, reach out to a member of the council through our website, and we can put you in touch with those people. But yeah, thanks for your question.
Andrew.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of reaching out to the council, and sort of most of us have sort of been in that region, and we kind of know how things are done over there. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for New Zealand tech companies to go over there. And so they've got to do their due diligence and understand how it works from a relationship point of view. And so talking to members of the council who can say, this is how you do business in Dubai or that region. So if for whatever reason you were able to get over there, to put yourself in front of someone, if whoever you're dealing with is 2 hours late, right, then they're 2 hours late. You have to stay there and be there. I remember for one of our tech clients over there who was trying to get a deal done, and it was someone from like a relative of a royal family. We just had to wait there for 2 hours to get the deal done, for them to turn up to get the deal done. So it's just understanding how it works. I think it's quite useful.
Yeah, and we've got opportunities for that. So yeah, it's not a NZMEBC plug, but that's what we're here for. That's our purpose.
Yeah. So NZT have been super helpful for us. Like they've helped to do market studies. They've helped us. We've used their office space, and yeah, just generally really good connection. You know, when to your point, you know, giving you a bit more local context, trying to open up some relationships. They've been really good, very helpful, and definitely a first point of call, I think, for any Kiwi company if you're thinking about going into the region.
Yeah, and as Ed said, I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 5 members of the council on this call, and between us, we've probably got probably about 80, if not close to 100 years of experience living in that in varying different countries in the region. So there's plenty of intelligence that can get outside of a government entity. You know, we might give you the brutal truth in some instances. Certainly, I will.
I think one thing just to add to that, Andrew, is what I found. Yes, we're going on to the point around relationships and how relationships are important. I think there's 2 parts to this. One is legally, it's now more and more straightforward to set up your company. You know, they've got free zones in place, regulations in place. They're pretty good in the legal setup front. Now, doing business, you obviously need relationships. The one thing I would say about this part of the world is that people are very open to building relationships. I actually found that more so than New Zealand, actually, in the UK. People are scrambling for a network. So, you know, it's not so difficult to go meet a CEO of this or the head of digital here or these kind of roles that perhaps may be a little bit intimidating to get there. You know, you can reach out to these people and people will meet you. So actually the building of the network is I found quite easy and open. I don't know if it's the expat thing, but it's it definitely helped.
No,
Must be the expat thing, Brad, because I had that in Singapore. Like it's the same. It must be the expat thing because you can navigate much faster than say sort of your local markets. It's a really good point.
Look, let's be honest, particularly in the UAE and I think Saudi Arabia, and Andrew towards the end of this call may give us another interesting insight in terms of what you were saying, Alex, about salaries going up 40%. It's not only that because of the limited resource globally, there's also competition between some of those GCC countries, you know, that they're wanting people to actually live in a certain jurisdiction and stay there, contribute to the economy, so they're willing to pay them more. And so it's another additional perspective. But I guess I think those levels of networks are critical. And I found the flip when I came back, Brad, to be frank, that I walked into a wall of conservatism in New Zealand. That region is extremely entrepreneurial and very innovative, and it's probably easier if you get into those right networks. There's plenty of help available to do so, that you can actually accelerate and achieve scalability faster. Look, come back to a couple more questions, and I think Rachel's put in the chat, if you'd like to add some questions in there, that might be a useful way of getting your points. If we don't get to them, we can record them, and the guys might be able to answer those separately. But I guess you've provided us some insights into how to do business. How about insights on the opportunities for your technology cloud-based services in the Middle East currently? And as a sort of subsidiary, what did you wish you knew earlier when targeting and establishing in the region? You can go first, Brad.
Okay, yeah, give me some time to think. Yeah, so what are the opportunities for, I'll talk about Cashee in particular. As I said before in my introduction, there's a huge amount of the population, in particular the young part of the population, which are financially excluded. They can't open a bank account. Even their parents do not know, they've got 2 mobile phones and no bank account, in some parts of this region. So it's there's a big opportunity to advance fintech, I think, and be able to plug a natural gap in the market in what has been a very old school banking society. From my particular business, the one advantage that we've got in terms of scale is, and this is the vision of it, is to be the first sort of regional bank. You can imagine every country has its own banks, its own regulator. So it's not easy for a bank in Dubai to go and launch in Saudi. This doesn't happen because Saudi has its own banks that are owned by the government and things like that. What Cashee does is actually plugs into each of the banking infrastructure in each country. So as an external brand, people will be using Cashee everywhere. But in the back end, we're plugged into a bank in UAE, we're plugged into a bank in Saudi, we're plugged into a bank in Egypt. So, so we're able to take a big regional brand and a big regional approach to this, and essentially it will become the first sort of regional banking brand, albeit for teenagers and parents of teenagers. What did I wish I knew? Actually, I think just in general, from a tech perspective, I was sick of making money for other people, to be honest. I helped a lot of people go through their fundraising and their exit strategy, and I attended a lot of celebration parties, and I was just bringing in the salary, So I wish, from a personal perspective, I had a passion for technology. I had a passion for startups and ideas, and having the courage, I think, to start earlier would have been what I wish I knew. It's not so difficult. Getting money isn't so tough. The good outweighs the bad in terms of the excitement level and the fear of starting your own business. And I wish, someone had taken me aside and said, this is something that can be done. And I think Kiwis is their natural ability to do this. We have a saying in our business, get shit done. And I think that's the Kiwi in me coming out saying, there's just get it done. There's obstacles and Kiwis just bust through the wall somehow, some way, and don't really quit. And I think the natural Kiwi in me lends itself to a startup business. So I wish I'd started earlier, actually.
Yeah, but if the roll your sleeves up and don't mind doing the dirty work alongside relationships at all levels of the socioeconomic span across countries like GCC that can actually also have a higher sort of structured caste type system as well.
Kiwis have a great reputation here, Andrew. They have a reputation similar around the world, of get stuff done, really open to relationships, not judgmental. I don't want to use the word racist, but not racist, so really open people and hardworking people. And that reputation really resonates through the region. I don't know how it happened, but it just happened. And almost across the whole region, I get a little bit of credibility actually from my accent and my background.
What I found, Brad, is that when I was over there, I'd be dealing with a lot of sort of management middle managers who were from, say, India and Pakistan, and the conversation would always talk about it would always start with, you guys have an awesome cricket team. So talking about the Black Caps rather than sort of heading straight into business, right? And so that actually built that rapport with them to actually get the deal done. But yeah, absolutely have a really good relationship with New Zealand.
I think then, because I'm very conscious of time, and there is a New Zealand element which sometimes can be overplayed. But when we've got our colleague Alex here, not in New Zealand, but from a New Zealand business, and we won't talk about cricket, particularly World Cup finals on this call. But Alex, what's your thoughts on the opportunities for your sector, and what would you have liked to have known earlier, particularly in this region?
It's quite interesting, actually. I'm originally with cricket. I'm English. My kids are Australian, and my wife is a Kiwi. So it's always an interesting conversation when you're sort of thinking about whose side you're on for cricket. So my kids were very happy last week when the Aussies won. My wife wasn't so happy. For us, we've been doing quite a bit of research in the market and just trying to understand the edtech market in the UAE and the broader region. The edtech market is very fragmented all over the world. There's like hundreds of businesses, thousands of companies. But what we've realized is that our technology is a real sort of standout from its sort of comprehensiveness and what it can do in classroom. So for us, really, it's the opportunities to just try and build our brand and build our profile. There's two ways we can do that. One is through schools, one by one. That's how we've built the business in New Zealand and Australia. And that's all through kind of word of mouth, but that takes time. I mean, the 2,000 schools in Australia has taken us a number of years to get to that kind of level and that scale. But we're already getting quite good traction within schools across a number of the countries in the region, and then trying to sort of build on those. So, and the feedback that we're getting is the product is very relevant, it's a good fit, and it's providing value. So we have high hopes around the opportunity for us, and we're going to use this as our sort of our main hub outside of ANZ. So we've got lots of people in Australia, lots of people in New Zealand, but we've made a decision that this region will be our sort of central point to then grow out more globally. So there's lots of opportunity. It's not without its challenges though, and I think for any tech company, it's just like trying to understand the local context. To Edwin's point around market, for us, that's education legislation's a little bit different around how they run schools. So just being very wary of that. And in terms of stuff that's good to know, it's funny, we're getting great traction in Canada selling our French product. And it almost surprised us because we're working in Canada and you would think, Montreal, it would be good French. So you thought, why would they need French lessons? And actually it's the same in the UAE. We have an Arabic product and that's actually getting a good traction, which we didn't realize we would have that opportunity. And that's something now that we're going to try and, focus on as potentially a bit more of a Trojan horse for us to show that we've got some really good local context and enable us to sort of build out a market from there.
Yeah, look, and I would recommend from certainly an education perspective, it's a very sought after. There's not enough. It's basically written text, colloquial or traditional, that interests students in that tech savvy scenario. We were things like the iPad where the script is there, you run your finger over the script and it gives you the actual translation of the sound, English, Arabic, English, etc. Those were gold, and that's probably 7 or 8 years ago now. So I assume the market's moved a lot further forward. But yeah, funny, isn't it?
The humour.
Not a lot of formal structure either.
No, that's right. But one of the challenges in the market, and so Andrew would know this, living in Dubai for so long, offices appear, buildings appear from nowhere, and things get moved around. And one of those things is schools. So 2 of our biggest customers in the UAE have closed, And what they're doing is they're rebuilding those schools, and they're going to build them up in the next 2-3 years. So you do have those sort of extra things that you'd never get in a New Zealand market or an Australian market or a UK market. But that's sort of embracing change and just removing a school in its entirety and building a brand new sparkling school within 1 year, 2 years. That's a very thing that happens in this region. It's a very unique thing that happens, and you have to just, adjust and go with the flow really with that.
Great. Look, I'm very conscious of the time. I'm still not seeing anything in the chat, so I'll push on with some of the more sort of questions that we've framed together as a council for this session. I think we've probably covered off things like what's working well or what's been difficult. But what recommendations would you give to people on the call this afternoon who are looking to take a technology-led business into the region? Give us your top 3 recommendations, each of you, on how to get in there and how to get cracking.
Yeah, first.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Alex. I think number 1 is UAE is not necessarily first. UAE is not such a big market, guys. So in terms of focus on the big boys, focus on KSA, I would say. If you can penetrate and do well in KSA, then that is a massive, massive market. And Egypt, for different reasons, is also a massive market, but with other challenges. So I think the mentality of sort of Dubai first, UAE first, feels logical to people because it's nice to live here and things like that. But there are bigger markets that are really dying to have tech businesses come in. So that would be my first point. My second point, I think, was also to Alex's before, is a local presence. You definitely need someone on the ground, someone that can meet people in person and create those relationships. It's super easy to set up a company now. They've got the kind of WeWork environments here that you can co-work space. So it's just getting easier and easier. You don't need to get a massive lease out an office and hire a bunch of people, but to have that local presence, I think, certainly helps. And I think my last point is to travel around the region. Spend a lot of time in each of the countries, really understand the nuances in each country, because you will be surprised, people that haven't been in the region, you'll be surprised at how different each are. And it's not until you spend some time in Saudi do you really understand Saudi. You spend some time in Qatar, you realize it's slightly different to the UAE in different ways, and Oman is a bit sleepier. And so these sort of things you need to experience and understand, so you don't feel the frustrations that others may. Why are things moving a little bit slower in Oman? Because they're just sleepier. They just do things a little bit slower. Why is Saudi so important on face-to-face? Because culturally that's really important. So these kind of nuances, I would encourage you to spend time in each of the main countries and really understand and live it for a bit. Meet as many people as you can to get that kind of local feeling.
Yeah, and that's a great tip. We did that actually looking at the US market. We decided to not look at the US and go for Canada, because Canada sort of flies under the radar a little bit in that region. I'll take your tip though with the UAE, Brad, in the Middle East. I think on the top 3, absolutely local top context, have someone on the ground. It's really important. You can't understand the market without it. Number 2, do lean on organizations like NZTE and that broader sort of community. It's really helpful. It's a really great way to help you get into market. And number 3, something that actually I've done with both businesses is partnerships. So have a think about where you can partner to help your business in that region. So for example, the big tech, the AWSs, the Apples, the Googles, the Microsofts, all of them are there. All of the others, there's lots of organizations that you could sort of lean on that have dedicated regional heads that you can connect to, and they can be super helpful as you're trying to sort of build your brand and build your profile in market.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. to give an example from Cashee, so we had a partnership strategy. Let's not just grow our brand ourselves. Let's get partners to help grow our brand for us. And being a fintech, we partnered with Visa, their fintech program, Microsoft and their startup program, Gem Schools. We're launching the partnership with Do, one of the biggest telco operators here, and really leveraging those partnerships and partnership brands, I think adds a little bit of local credibility somehow.
Yeah.
Oh, you've partnered with Do, okay, therefore you get the meeting, you get the attention. So yeah, I think that partnership point is a very, very important one.
Yeah, we're partnering with Dell, for example, who provide laptops into a lot of the schools, and so for us, that's an interesting relationship that will help us build our brand within schools.
Maybe just chip in here as well. I mean, I think Brad has summed up a lot of the things inside the market here very well. As someone that's been knocking around here for over 10 years and I'm working for a local family. And one of the things is that things are changing very, very quickly, particularly in Saudi. I'm in Saudi every week, and the pace of change over the past 2 years has been more than I've seen since I first came here in 2009. And although they've opened it up and they're making it easier to set up business, but in Saudi the reality is that you still do need to have a local partner. You need to have someone that does know how the place works. It is different to UAE. I mean, when I lived in Singapore, it was always very easy. People speak Singlish in Singapore, and it was sort of Asia for beginners. And UAE is probably very similar to that. It's very easy to do business in English. Saudi is still very different. The Saudiization program is far more aggressive than the Emiratization program as well. And so you're seeing a lot of people in positions as a result of that, and that can produce a bit of a challenge in terms of their capability to be able to actually do their roles that are there. From a technology point of view, we're actually a joint venture with Etisalat for Mobali. And in fact, we actually make up about 44% of Mobali's annual revenue as well. And during COVID, because we have the contract for doing fiber to the home, was one of the great things for our group of businesses, because that grew just existentially. We actually took about 1,000 people from one of our other businesses and put them into the FTTH part of the business. Equally, we also have our own technology company. And part of the reason for that is that when it comes to tariffs and fees for certain things in Saudi, the rates are so much lower than anywhere else in either the Commonwealth or elsewhere in the Western world, that the license fees made it prohibitive to actually bring in overseas technology. So we actually developed our own tech business back in 2008, and so we have some global partnerships that are there, but a lot of our technology now we're actually developing ourselves. So we have our own Android and iOS developers for doing our phone app, and some of our other key technologies have been developed in-house, just simply because the ROI on using major vendors overseas made it quite prohibitive as well. And you've seen with the PIF starting to make some pretty serious investments now into companies, and to be able to get them global and get them going pretty quickly. The Saudi-made logo, which has now been launched, and the whole Saudi-made program is starting to push as well for the Saudi companies to be able to promote themselves beyond just the country and be seen as a technology hub as well. There are, as I found, I brought 2 companies into the Middle East. Both of them ended up working with Al Musfar as a local partner before I actually joined them. And there are some restrictions around overseas data, being based overseas and needing to use local cloud-based infrastructure as well. As a result, I mean, one of the interesting things with Saudi is that it's actually more open from a telco point of view. I mean, I've just come back from being in Saudi for a couple of weeks, and you can use FaceTime without any problems. You don't need a VPN there yet in the UAE. It's actually more restrictive in terms of VoIP technology than it is over there as well. And that's just one of the things you kind of, the perception that people have is actually slightly different on the ground as well. And here in, on my office here in the DIFC, there's now a massive fintech development program going on down the end of the Gate Village in the DIFC, and certainly the UAE government pushing more and more off the back of things such as the success of Kareem to make this a technology hub for the region. And so the competition now, particularly between Saudi and the UAE, is hotting up a lot more in many different ways, including around the technology development as well. So it is important spending as much time in the region, because between trips things are changing a lot.
Yeah, look, thanks, Andrew. Look, I am very conscious of time, and we have come to the end. There were some further questions regarding regulatory and legal and other issues when establishing a business. Should those be burning questions for anyone on the call, I would encourage you to reach out to Ed, to Chris Peichel, who's joined, Simon, who's on, Brad, myself, Tara, Darren, any member of the council. And it's great that we've got Rachel here, because maybe that the membership of this meeting can also, we can follow up through. And then the other one was really around, going and protecting your IP, your intellectual property rights, particularly in that tech space. So if either of you have got a very quick comment on that last one, and then we'll call the session to a close.
Yeah, I mean, on the IP point, just quickly. So we've used a free zone here that's kind of based on the UK legal system. So we've got registered trademarks throughout the region. We have to go to each country and get trademarks for our brand and things like that. So it's a little bit disjointed in that way. From an IP perspective, we're trying to leverage off European law as much as possible through the free zone that we use. The one thing is, I guess it's not so tested, there's not too many IP disputes going through the court, so no one really knows what's going to happen. But the regulations are there. Yeah, I think it's one of those things you have to live with in the region. A lot of companies actually set up the IP companies in other countries, in the Netherlands or Ireland. They'll just park their IP there because of the protection.
Alex, I mean, you and I both know that the education regulations and laws can be quite strict about timings for curriculum, etc. But how have you guys got on with IP or other things?
Yeah, it's not smart. I mean, our IP sort of all resides in New Zealand. Probably the main considerations for us would be around data privacy, where data sits, and that's ever evolving actually, as you kind of work more with governments and school bodies. And with COVID now, a lot more government are getting across that. So for example, even in Australia, the rules have changed, and certain states have got certain requirements of where data sits. We haven't had that as yet with the Middle East, and we're kind of going in at the front foot that we are meeting US, UK, Australia, Kiwi guidelines, but we'll have to adjust potentially as legislation changes in that region. But at the moment, we haven't had any challenge or anything that's unique to date. Brilliant.
Well, look, a big thanks from myself and members of the council for your time this morning, Alex and Brad, and wherever you are. For the majority of some of us, I know on the council, it's late afternoon, early evening. Wish you well. I know it's exciting times over there with Expo 2020, and a few of us here are suffering from a bit of FOMO. But you know, things are changing. Vaccination certificates, etc. So who knows? We know that Minister Mahuta is there at the moment. There's a lot of excitement around what's happening in terms of the Indigenous advocacy. So yeah, onwards and upwards. And there's still a few months in which we might be able to get over there and then get back safely. So sorry to you, Andrew P, that you've missed out again on the lottery, but I'll see if I can put in a word as I go past the MIQ facility on my way home tonight. But yeah, certainly thank you for your attendance, everybody else. I hope you found the session valuable. There'll probably be a follow-up from the council regarding the session itself, but certainly to both Alex and Brad, I really appreciate your contribution and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you. Cheers.
Thank you.